Eagles Entertainment.
With the 15th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we've got another mock draft and some combine news to break down. But first, we're going to start things off with Mr. Relevant, where Brett Kollman, who does a great job breaking down the NFL, college football, the NFL draft, all things football, he's going to come on to just talk through some more all-star movers and shakers. You can find Brett's work over on the Film Room on YouTube, but Brett's going to talk about standouts from the Shrine Bowl. He was there in Las Vegas last week, as well as the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. We'll get to that at the very top of the show with Mr. Relevant. After that, we've got Draft Buzz, where not only are we going to get into Lance Zierlein's latest mock draft with Ben Fennell, but we are also going to break down the announcement. On Wednesday afternoon, the NFL released the list of names that were invited to the scouting combine in Indianapolis. We're going to break down some of the surprises there of names that weren't on the list, as well as some things just to keep in mind as we get into that stage of the pre-draft process. Then we wrap it up with a mock draft from one of you at home in our draft mailbag segment. But as always, before we get started, I'm always going to remind you, make sure you head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. If you've got a question, if you've got a mock draft like the one we're going to break down at the end of today, I will say that was the last comment on our Apple Podcast page. So if you've got a question, if you've got a mock draft, you can get right to the front of the line. You can jump on and we will answer it on the next episode of the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand. You could do that wherever you listen to your podcast. Let's get things started, though. Excited to catch up with Brett Kollman for the very first time right here in Mr. Relevant.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to welcome in for the first time here on the Journey to the Draft podcast for Mr. Relevant, Brett Kollman. You could follow him on Twitter at Brett Kollman and follow his YouTube series, The Film Room, which not only is entertaining, but always informative. You're learning so much about from an X and O standpoint, the schematic element of the game, but also looking at traits and player evaluation. Brett, thanks so much to jump on the show, man. I'm really excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. I've been listening and following your work for a long time, so it's nice to be here.
No, I appreciate it, man. And I wanted to bring you on because I know you were at both the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl, and you double dip. So I'm excited to kind of get your thoughts on the players that stood out most to you. And we'll start in Las Vegas. I want to go through 5 guys that really kind of caught your eye out there at the Shrine Bowl. And we'll start right at the top. Who was number 1 on your list? Walking away from the game, you're like, this guy really kind of caught my eye.
We got about 3 or 4 reps into the one-on-ones on day 1 before I think everybody at that practice realized that Kyle Phillips from UCLA was the guy in terms of, winning, not just cleanly, but like obliterating DBs in the one-on-ones. Like he was by far the most impressive receiver or really impressive skill position player at any position the entire week. I don't think I saw him lose once. And that's saying something. Like even when we were in team periods, like, they were bracketing him in team because they couldn't do anything about it. And almost by the 3rd day of practice, I was talking to a couple friends that were also there kind of watching practice. We almost felt like it was a detriment to all of the other receivers there because he got open so quickly and the quarterbacks knew that he was going to be open so quickly and they just wanted to get completions. So they just kept throwing it to him. Like there's a kid from Idaho State there, Tanner Connor, who's 230, runs as what he says a 4.3 because he's a former track guy, hurdler at 230. And he was getting open deep down the field. But Kyle Phillips, every time he was on the field, he was getting open, the first 2 steps of the route. So nobody else was getting any targets. So it was almost bad for everybody else that he was on the field because he's so damn good. But he might actually end up being the highest drafted player from the entire game because he kept getting open.
Interesting. He's a guy, I have not done the deep dive yet on Kyle Phillips, and you are not the only one that has raved about his performance to me. So I'm interested to kind of dive a little bit deeper into him. I know kind of like the profile in terms of quick separator, has been more of an underneath intermediate area weapon for UCLA. I know he had a big year this year. He's also been a quality punt returner over the course of his career. I know he's scored twice on special teams, so that certainly is going to help. Also known as a bit of a blocker as well. So at 5'11", 190 pounds soaking wet, you say, all right, well, this guy can come in. He can separate inside. He's also going to impact as a blocker. And obviously the impact that a good blocker in the slot can have in terms of a team's efficiency and versatility versatility to be able to stay in 11 personnel and still be able to run the ball effectively. So I think that that's a trait that will help him moving to the NFL as well.
Yeah, the best way that I heard him described was he's Hunter Renfrow with 2 shots of espresso in his bloodstream. That's pretty much what he is.
I like it. All right, well, let's get to the next guy. Who's the second guy on your list here?
Much lower on the radar, even by Shrine Bowl standards coming into this week. That's Thomas Booker, who is an interior defensive lineman from Stanford. Really explosive. He played kind of a thankless role in that defense, playing a 4-eye a lot, which is probably why the Chargers were one of the first teams to bring him in for one-on-ones. He actually talked to all 32 teams when he was at Shrine Bowl because he played a variety of different roles, but the Chargers, they're looking for a guy to play that role. So no surprise they brought him in. The thing that caught my eye about him, though, not only was he winning the one-on-ones and kind of showing off the explosiveness that he didn't really get to show at Stanford, he might be the smartest player at that whole event at any position.
Wow.
We talked for 45 minutes about defensive line technique and reads. And, he's pulling out his iPad with 3 years of hand-drawn notes for different stunts that he would bring to his defensive coordinator that he wanted to run, and, little alterations to how they ran techs and stuff like that. Like, he could honestly coach tomorrow, and he hasn't played a single down in the NFL. He is that smart. He got recruited by Stanford, Michigan, Notre Dame. And the reason why he chose Stanford is because he took a college econ class there when he was a sophomore in high school and decided he really liked it. So then he went to Stanford for 5 years, was an econ and I believe poli-sci minor.
Okay.
Like the dude is brilliant.
Yeah, sure.
He's brilliant. He's going to be one of those guys where, and it's probably why he talked to all 32 teams. Every time a defensive line talks to him or defensive line coach talks to him, he's going to fall in love. It's almost impossible not to. He's that good.
Well, the big knock on him is going to be that frame, that arm length. I think that's going to be the knock. But this guy has played a ton of football, 2-time team captain, kind of speaking to the intangibles part of it. Second team all conference this year, first team all Pac-12 a year ago. So interested to kind of get more info there on Thomas Booker. Who's number 3 for you on your list?
I would say Tay Martin, the Oklahoma State kid.
Yep.
Were not for Kyle Phillips, he probably would have been the most impressive receiver there for me in terms of consistent separation. And this receiver class there was actually pretty good. Like Josh Johnson had a really good week. All the tight ends had a really good week. If you want to count some of them as basically glorified wide receivers, but like Tay Martin, I think was very underappreciated. I think he's like a natural fit as like, how would I describe? Like, like a Darius Slayton type where, where he's coming into a team to kind of be like a high upside wide receiver number 3, but could probably be a wide receiver number 2 for some teams. Like, I think he's going to be a very, very valuable contributor for the Eagles, who I know are, I don't know, for the 10th year running, looking for more wide receiver help. I think he could be a guy that they're looking at on day 3 for kind of playing that role.
Interesting. And certainly a guy that in that offense, especially got to put some of that vertical ability on display down the field. Let's get to number 4.
So this one it might be a little bit more team dependent.
Okay.
But Chig Okonkwo, the Maryland tight end, he's 6'2", about 242, 243, somewhere in that range. They put him at Y tight end a lot because he's a really good blocker at the point of attack. They left him one-on-one on pass pro against 6'5" edges from Penn State, and he was doing really well there. Really good like technique as a pass blocker, which is weird. He's a very, very versatile player. Not to mention he can also run and catch and all that kind of stuff. There were some weird drops here and there, but I didn't necessarily think it was like a bad issue for him. Profiling him is a little bit tough to do because, again, his skill set versus his dimensions are 2 very different things. When you think of a wide tight end, you're thinking 6'6", 265.
Yeah,
you're not thinking
6'2", 240.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's almost like, okay, is he Delaney Walker? Is he Kyle Juszczyk? Like, can you make him an H-back? And for me, I think the answer is yes to both.
Right.
I don't necessarily know how he's going to be used yet, but I know if you put him with an offensive coordinator that sees somebody of that frame that can block and catch, they'll figure it out.
Yeah, Charles Clay type in terms of that usage.
Yes. But maybe even better as a blocker.
Interesting. That's going to be an interesting guy to follow. And he's gotten a lot of buzz. He will be going to the combine in Indianapolis. So a former wide receiver moved to tight end. Another name to keep an eye on. It's just that this tight end class just so deep. Let's get to one more. Take us home here for the Shrine Bowl.
So how about another tight end, but almost the exact opposite type? Jelani Woods. I actually thought he was an offensive tackle for the first day we were there at practice because he's so big. He's like 6'6", 6'7", super long, really runs well for somebody of his frame. He's not like a clunky runner. Like he's legitimately got some speed. I kind of liken him, and I can't remember who was the first person who mentioned this during the week, but it made so much sense that I ran with it. Mo Alley Cox, but maybe with a little bit more hip fluidity. Which, Mo Alley Cox is more of like a post-up guy. I think Jelani Woods, you can actually kind of, do some of the stick nod stuff with him, and he can do it. He's not just I'm going to run straight and jump really high kind of guy, but he is that kind of frame where, again, let's say you're the Eagles and you're looking for a red zone threat. He can do that in addition to some of the other stuff. I think Jelani Woods is going to go higher than people think, even in this deep of a tight end class, because it's hard to find somebody that big that can run like that.
I mean, when you talk about the profile, you talk about the size. I mean, nearly 6'7", over 34-inch arms. He's played a ton of football, 38 starts in his career. He was at Virginia this past year, but he began his career at Oklahoma State. I know they had high hopes for him going into that 2020 season, but he only had 31 catches in his first 3 years there. And then he goes to UVA this past year, coming in with 31 career catches. He had 44 last season. He had 8 touchdowns, kind of speaking to that ability to get into the paint and make some plays. Jelani Woods, a really interesting profile. And again, this tight end class, stupid deep. Just a really, really impressive group overall. So 5 names down for the Shrine Bowl. Let's get to 3 for Mobile, because obviously a lot of different options. I want to ask you, who's a guy that kind of surpassed expectations? So we'll kind of put that framework here for these 3 names. Guys that kind of surpassed any expectations you had before arriving at the Senior Bowl.
So this is going to sound weird because I had very high expectations going into the week anyway. Because, I'll preface this by saying this: when I was at the Senior Bowl a couple of years ago, Justin Herbert and Jordan Love were there, and you might have been there at the same time too. You remember that like second practice where it was 30 degrees and just wet and windy and miserable?
Sounds familiar. Sounds like something we experienced last week as well.
Yep. And you saw Justin Herbert throwing a deep 7 in the wind, no problems. And then who was next up after him? Anthony Gordon.
Okay. Yep.
Didn't look the same.
No, it's a different deal. Yeah.
Different caliber of physical traits here. I think we saw the exact same thing last week, where you saw Malik Willis step up and throw the ball, and you saw some other guys step up and throw the ball, who also I think are good NFL prospects. But the NFL today is ruled by freaks with crazy arms and crazy mobility that are just coachable, and you kind of let them work out their warts, and you trust your coaches to turn them into basically football demigods. Worked with Mahomes, Allen, Lamar. You work down the list. There's a lot of guys that came into the league pretty raw, but had tools, and you trusted your coach to get the most out of them. I think we're going to see the same thing with Malik Willis. It's the exact same like deja vu moment for me also, of looking at that Justin Herbert ball cut through the wind and say, if nothing else, he's got that. And Malik Willis, again, late. He was throwing, he threw a quick out off a hitch late, but his arm was so good in that team practice that he still got it there on time and on target. It's hard to put into perspective how rare that is to have that kind of arm. And so I do think when I look at his tools, if he goes to the right team, I don't know what team that is yet. If he goes to the right team, he can be another one of these guys where it gives you a chance at a Super Bowl every single year.
It was in the rain on that rain day, that Wednesday, the 7-on-7 drill.
was where I think that was what kind of won people over with how he threw the football in that drill. I think he had like 3 or 4 throws, 3 or 4 dropbacks, and the one he threw was like a deep dig. It was like the third read, the progression. There were a couple other ones out to the perimeter. It was like, man, like you said, the way that the ball just kind of popped out of his hand and then cut through the wind, because it was gross out that day, and he really, really impressive, no question. And to me, one of the better practices that we've seen down there. Let's get to your next guy.
So this one also not a super big surprise because he's a national champion and he was one of the most lauded interior defensive linemen in this entire class, as he should be. That's Devontae Wyatt. Coming into the week, I think he was seen by many of like, okay, he's 5 tech, he's a 4-eye, he's a guy who's going to take on the doubles and do all the stack and shed stuff that we saw Georgia do when they're playing in the tight fronts and the 505 and all that kind of stuff. But you see him get into the one-on-ones and how quick he is as like a true 3. It was really eye-opening. Like, I knew he was a good athlete. I did not expect him to completely undress a whole lot of guards like he did in those one-on-one drills. Like, he really showed out as a pass rusher. And so the fact that we already know that he can do all the non-flashy 5-tech stuff, but also do the flashy 3-tech stuff.
Yep.
Easy first-round pick. I mean, wow. Easy first-round pick.
His quickness off the ball, I mentioned earlier this week on the show, that's what really kind of caught my eye. You didn't necessarily expect it because, as you mentioned, the usage, what he was asked to do with the Bulldogs, but his ability to kind of cross face and be able to penetrate, he worked both edges. I thought that he was impressive from that standpoint. Let's take us home. What's your third and final player there from Mobile who surpassed those preconceived notions, those expectations going in?
Well, I'll answer your last question with a question of my own. How many times did you write down Jermaine Johnson's name watching the one-on-ones there?
A handful of times, we'll say. It was a lot. It certainly stood out.
Yeah, he made himself a lot of money at Senior Bowl week, and he kind of came into the week seen as like, okay, like a fringe first rounder in a very deep edge class because everybody's like, we love Thibodeau, we love Hutchinson, Karlaftis, Ojabo, like the list goes on and on of all these edges. I think Jermaine Johnson cemented himself as being either equal or very close to equal of like those top 3 that everybody always brings up. He's got the frame, length, strength. Like he showed really, really good hands in the one-on-ones. Like he wasn't just running through people. He was neutralizing punches and, kind of stringing together different moves. I think he put himself kind of on the map in terms of how draft media people already knew who he was, but I think he kind of changed how people see him and value him in this edge class. He's not just the other guy anymore. Now he is one of the guys, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like it's for a lot of people, it'll be you're putting together your mock draft, and it's like, I can't not have Jermaine Johnson on this in his top 32. I feel like that's kind of where he looks at himself now at this point. And again, it's still very early, but from the way that media views him, definitely would change based off last week.
And I'm sure the teams were already way ahead of us on that. I bet they were.
Sure, right.
They were the ones who demanded him to be there in the first place. But media, at least my side of things, that's just getting into these guys because I was doing NFL for the last 6 months.
Yep.
I caught up in about 10 reps of one-on-ones.
Some of those guys, that's all it takes. Brett, this has been awesome, man. Really appreciate the time spending us here with Mr. Relevant. We will talk to you again soon. Again, everybody, make sure you go follow Brett on Twitter. Make sure you go subscribe to the YouTube page. The Film Room, as always, outstanding stuff. Brett, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, excited to keep the show rolling here with Draft Buzz as I welcome in our friend Ben Fennell. And Ben, before we get into our mock draft, on Wednesday afternoon, late morning, the official combine list went out. So all the players that have been invited to the National Scouting Combine, which is going on as scheduled, the last week of February, I believe the first players will report, I believe it's February 28th, and then it's through that whole first week of March. It's going to be good to be back in Indianapolis, but now we know the players that will officially be there. Before we get into this mock, I thought let's just get a couple takeaways from you. I don't know, like surprise names that were left off the list, thoughts on the group in general, just whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, it's always great to get the list of the combine because this helps us as evaluators, fans, everybody outside the circles to really streamline who the NFL is interested in.
Yep.
And this is the best list of prospects that the NFL wants to work out, interview, and uncover more information about. So this is a great starting point as well to let us know who is prioritized in the minds of the NFL. And it's always interesting to see who is not on the list. And I was just looking at a bunch of heavy running backs yesterday, some that I liked. Cameron Harris out of Miami, not on the list. Zonovan Knight, NC State, is going, but his teammate Ricky Person is not going. And then some of the more eye-popping was the O-line group, which there was a bunch of guys from the Shrine game in particular that weren't on the combine list that I thought had some really good days down there, some good tape, and some good measurements. I mean, Olaseni out of Utah, that wingspan and length, I thought alone was worth another look at. You know, Ryan Van DeMark out of UConn, nearly 3,000 snaps played, really good tape, experienced player, one of the better practice players of the week. Or Brock Hoffman, center out of Virginia Tech, transfer from Coastal Carolina, nasty player in the trenches in there, was at O-line masterminds over the summer. But there's a bunch of guys, just coincidentally, a lot of Shrine guys that were down in Vegas last week, not on the list that I thought warranted an invite, but wasn't sure if there was any off the top of your head or that caught your eye.
Yeah, I would say the few that just kind of going through the list, and it's funny, going through the list and figure out who the snubs are is kind of a 2 or 3 pronged process, because it's like, all right, let me just double check, make sure that the guy, like I didn't see it on the first pass. Let me make sure he's definitely not on there. And then you have to also check, did this guy go back to school? Did he officially declare? Did he go into the transfer portal instead? So there were a couple guys that I noted. I was like, oh, this guy's not on here. And it's like, oh, so, Seven Banks. Like, oh, he went back to school. Right. So there were a couple of those guys making those final passes. I would say for me, some of the big names at running back, Calvin Turner from Hawaii is a player that we've talked about. He was at the Shrine Bowl last week, kind of a hybrid running back receiver, or early in his career was a quarterback in an option scheme. So Calvin Turner was a bigger one for me. At wide receiver, 2 names. Jaquez Ezzard, who was a late ad for the Senior Bowl last week. He was also at the NFLPA game. That one was surprising. The wide receiver, a speedy kid from Sam Houston State. And then Javon Hiley, who was also at the Shrine Bowl from Coastal Carolina. He is not going to the combine. So that one was a little bit surprising. I thought that guy was kind of in that early day 3 range. From the skill guys, those were the big shocks for me.
Yeah, in turning it over to the defensive side, I think it's always interesting to see some of the positional designations. And these are big blanket groups. So you have D-line, linebacker, DB. So within the D-line, typically gets divided 2 groups of workouts, trench players, the interior guys, and the edge guys. But it was interesting to see who was listed in the D-line and who was listed in the linebacker group. Because there were some linebackers that I thought should have been edges, like Jermaine Johnson and Drake Jackson, Trey Williams out of Arkansas, Boye Mafe. It's great to see him with the linebackers. Maybe they do some more drills in space and off ball, some Sam stuff. But then why don't we see Nick Benito with the linebackers, or David Ajabo? What about Jesse Luketa, who has literally played off ball half his career at Penn State? Those guys are with the D linemen. So interested to see where certain guys fall as well. It's not the gospel. There's obviously the ability that, hey, if a linebacker wants to do some DB drills, there's probably going to be an opportunity at the end of the linebacker workouts to do some extra stuff, punt returning things. There's always an extra opportunity at the end of workouts. So it's not the gospel, but just fun to look at.
That's the tough part when looking at how they separate the groups. It is just D-line, linebacker, DB. And it's like you just wish there was like that delineation between the interior D linemen and the edge guys. Take those linebackers that are at that edge group, just put them all with one. Because like you said, the David Ojabo, he's going to go through the D-line workout, which is going to have a specific set of drills. But that at the end of the night, which, by the way, remember, like the drills are prime time now. So it's going to be like 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night. And now we're going to put David Ojabo through the paces of doing a linebacker workout, right? So that part of it, a little bit difficult as well.
Yeah, and like I had mentioned, a D-line group typically split into 2 different groups, some edges, some interior guys. Same thing with the DBs. You're going to notice a group that's a lot of safeties and a group that's a lot of corners when you actually get into the workout. So that's traditionally been the plan of Jeff Foster. I know they're kind of change it and tweak it every year. He's in a very much a transitional stage with some new drills, some new scheduling, things like that. So we'll see where things go from here. Really quick, Fran, any names really quick? I'm going to put you on the spot, browsing up and down that sheet. Throw me a name or 2 that said, whoa, who's this guy? Or, whoa, I've never heard of that scheme.
There was
I got a couple for you real quick. I'll give you time to search.
The tackle from Culver, it was a really
Culver Stockton.
Culver Stockton.
Yeah. I got that tape queued up for the afternoon. There's a couple guys, Curtis Hodges, tight end, Arizona State, which, by the way, Arizona State sending 8 players to the combine.
Yeah.
That's more than some big time programs around college football. So Arizona State gets a lot of good prospects, but Curtis Hodges, hands up on that one. There's always a couple names out there where you're like, whoa, not only do I not know, I haven't studied him, I'm not really sure who he is. There's a lot of guys to cover when you're a one-man scouting department.
The Northern Iowa receiver. I was not
Isaiah Weston.
Yeah,
okay.
I was not familiar with Isaiah Weston. And then there was actually a second receiver. Hold on one second. I could tell you exactly who that was because it was right next to.
I had one other one. I had a D tackle, Jonathan Ford out of Miami. He was another one I had to add to my sheet. I didn't have him in there.
See, I had him in there, but real quick.
See, I've been getting ahead of this, Fran. Occasionally throughout the past few weeks, I've been searching Twitter for combine invite because certain players have announced themselves. So there's some guys like Kalia Davis from UCF that I had not heard of until I saw he was invited to the combine 2 weeks ago. So I did get ahead of this just a little bit, but even so, you just can't get ahead of the whole program.
You can't get ahead of everybody.
I'm looking here, Jordan Jackson, Air Force. I know right away. I don't have him on my sheet. So it's tough being a one-man scouting department. I know you got a couple names.
Mike Woods, Oklahoma, was the other player, the receiver from Oklahoma. I didn't have on my sheet, had nothing on him. The wide receiver from Oklahoma.
As I'm throwing my hands up in visual, I don't know who that is either.
No, there are a bunch of other guys that I know I just haven't gotten to. They were on my list. Maybe they were on the Senior Bowl watch list coming into the year. Real quick, a few more names that kind of stood out to me. No Matt Henningsen, defensive tackle from Wisconsin. He was at the Shrine Bowl. Eric Johnson, who I thought had a good week down in Mobile from Missouri Western, defensive tackle. He's not on the list. Staying with the Senior Bowl, a couple other guys that were in Mobile that won't be in Indianapolis. Sterling Weatherford, the safety from Miami, Ohio, made the move to linebacker. He was not invited. Kyron Johnson from Kansas, who played off the edge at like 225, and maybe he's an off-ball guy. Kyron Johnson, not on the list for the combine.
He's been reportedly one of the fastest players in the Big 12, too. He would have been a darling out there in shorts and a T-shirt.
Yep. So Gregory Jr. from Washita Baptist, who was down in Mobile, he's not going to be down there in Indianapolis. Tariq Carpenter, the Georgia Tech safety turned linebacker, also not going to be in Indianapolis. Trey Barry, the tight end from Boston College, who came up from Jacksonville State. He's not on the invite list. So there were a number of names that really surprised me. One junior that really caught me off guard because of the pub that he came with. And that's Jaquan McMillan from East Carolina. It was a second-team All-American. There had been a little bit of buzz. I know that Dane has talked about him a little bit.
Is he on or off?
He is off. He's not on the list. So I would say that those would be some of the big glaring names for me in terms of and some of these guys I haven't studied. Some of them I have. Big Cat Bryant, another one from Central Florida, formerly of Auburn. He's not heading to Indy. So a number of names. And look, the big thing to remember, just because you're not invited to the combine, just like Ben said earlier, yes, this list gives you the bulk of those names. But I would say roughly like 20 to 30 names every year get drafted despite not getting that combine invite. So we've brought up, right around that mark. Now, not all these guys, the guys we've named in this pod are going to be drafted, but that just gives you that pool that there are going to still be plenty of players that aren't going to Indianapolis that will hear their names called come draft weekend.
And the last thing before we put this list to bed, it is just a list compiled on NFL.com. It's not an official document with their given names. So if you're just doing a Control F find, you're going to notice Jacoby Durant is listed as Kobe Durant. Damarian Williams out of Houston.
Threw me off.
It's listed by his nickname, Pepe.
Yeah, right.
William Dunkel at San Diego State is big guard, mauler. Yep. He's listed as Bill. So if you're just doing the search a name, buyer beware out there. Yep. There's a lot of different categories. You could search by school, position, or the straight list, but it's all how it's listed out there. So once again, it's just a list written by an NFL.com guy out there. It's not the gospel. Make sure you do your homework.
But I do like the way that they structured that this year. It was a good user experience for the being able to structure that list in a number of ways. Speaking of NFL.com, let's go to a mock draft that was over on NFL.com in the past week.
See another one here. Makai Polk, Mississippi State.
That's another one. Yeah. I had him on the sheet. I had him on the sheet, but I did not write him up yet. So I got a lot of work to do before we make the trip out to Indy. Speaking of which, though, like I said, let's get to Lance Zierlein's mock draft here. And Ben, a couple of trades in this mock draft, and Lance loves working in some of these deals into these mock drafts. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts. I think obviously the big one that's going to catch a lot of eyes is the Pittsburgh Steelers trading up to select quarterback Malik Willis from Liberty, getting ahead of the New Orleans Saints. So the Steelers in this mock draft moving from 20 to 17 and taking the quarterback from Liberty. That would be an interesting selection there. And it's honestly, it's one that a lot of people are starting to connect those dots there. Malik Willis to Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, obviously one of the more glaring and obvious quarterback needs across the NFL is the Pittsburgh Steelers. And nobody really knows who they're coveting or how aggressive they're going to be in this quarterback class to move up and go get their guy. But I love seeing the trade there, being aggressive, getting a Malik Willis. So I think would be a lovely marriage with him and Mike Tomlin. The other trade, more in the top 10 here. How about the Giants moving up? They already have 2 top 10 picks. I don't know what type of capital they're using to move up, but they're swapping with the Texans to get Ike Ekwonu and NC State, securing that offensive line for Daniel Jones or wherever the future of the quarterback position is, building through the trenches first with Brian Daboll, new head coach out there. I don't know if Giants fans are going to be too happy about going O-line again, or them to say, you know what, let's get it right. Because maybe Nate Solder didn't work out. Maybe Andrew Thomas didn't work out. Maybe Will Hernandez isn't a long-term guy. We need to fix the O-line. That's what makes the offense tick. That's what's going to pave lanes for Barkley and keep our quarterback upright. Ike Ekwonu. I think the conversation, Fran, about whether he's an inside or an outside guy hasn't been fully opened yet. I like him at guard more than tackle, but that's for another day. Ike Ekwonu to the Giants with an aggressive top 10 trade up.
And for those teams that are drafting up that high, this draft is being talked about as it's not super strong in the top 10, the value. I know Daniel Jeremiah just said on the Move the Sticks podcast, he felt like the best value in this draft would be between picks 15 and 45. So I just think talking about where the value is in this draft. But that said, if you're a team picking up that high, I think you almost want to throw need out the window. So let's just get the best players. Let's just find an elite. Who are the elite players in this draft? And that would be my argument for trading up to take a guy like Ekwonu.
And really quick, just to talk the other side of the trade, the Texans then get Derek Stingley. So I believe it's a swap of the 4th and the 6th or the 7th pick. I think the Texans are moving down and probably getting the same guy they would have taken with that pick. Yep. So interesting little cat and mouse there. And I think the top 10 teams are definitely going to look to acquire more picks in that 15 to 45 range. So let's see who could do something like the Texans here, still get their guy, but probably add another pick or 2 later.
All right. Well, speaking of the 15 to 45 range, let's talk about a team that's got 3 picks in that range.
Just call that the Eagle.
Yeah, right. The Eagle range. They got 3 picks between 15 and 19. And in this mock draft, Lance has a couple familiar names, but also a new one here. So we're going to get to the first one. 15th overall. Offensive lineman Kenyon Green. Lance lists him as a guard. Here's the blurb from Lance. With the Eagles likely in need of a replacement for pending free agent Jason Kelce, Landon Dickerson could slide into the starting center role, leaving a spot open for Green. He will become a day one starter as a drive blocking guard with size, athleticism, and toughness. I think one notable thing, and people kind of forget about Lance, because Lance, when he's doing a lot of the stuff that he does in the media, people forget, not only is he the NFL.com's one of their key draft figures, but he's got a great background with the offensive line. His dad, Larry Zierlein, a longtime NFL offensive line coach. And so when he talks offensive line, he's one of the voices in the media space that I listen to. So I think it is notable that he values Kenyon Green in that top 15.
Yeah, it seems like Kenyon's been a lock in the first round. I did see Lance through Zion Johnson, the back end of his first round, which seems like that's how it's trending. And I'll take this conversation another direction. Where do you differentiate those two? I think Zion's a little quicker, more for the zone scheme. Kenyon's more the power guy, more the vertical displacement guy. I think really represents the Brandon Brooks of our offensive line, a guy that can survive in zone, but he's a guy that's looking to move people off the ball. And he's a guy that Kenyon Green's literally started up and down the line, just like our pick last year, Landon Dickerson. So we love the versatility. I think we need to keep addressing the offensive line, keep adding coals to the furnace there, because that's what makes the offense tick. So I think Kenyon Green would be a great pick, not only for the Eagles. I really think it'd be a great pick for any team across the NFL, but definitely more of a power people mover than Zion Johnson.
Yeah, no doubt. I think you made a perfect point in terms of how that matches with Landon Dickerson and some of the traits that he shared coming out of Alabama a year ago. Let's get to the next pick here, 16 overall. Wide receiver Drake London, who we just saw Todd McShay named Drake London, number one wide receiver. Nate Tice over with Bleacher Report, Drake London, number one wide receiver. So a lot of buzz for Drake London. And Lance has the blurb here. This might not be the pick I would make, but the Eagles need a possession receiver with size and contested catch talent. London fits the bill. To that point, and Lance alluded to it, that's not the pick he would make, but we see plenty of analysts out there that love Drake London. It just feels like he's going to be one of the most highly debated prospects, really by Eagles fans, especially because of the wide receivers getting mocked to the Eagles a lot in these mock drafts. He's going to be one of the highly debated prospects over the next couple months.
He's a really impressive receiver, height, weight, speed guy. He's going to look great in Indianapolis in his workouts, assuming he's fully healthy from his late season injury as well.
Broken ankle, right?
I believe so. Yep. But he's been a guy that has been a much better route runner than his size would suggest, a much better yards after catch guy than his size would suggest. And when I'm reflecting to Jalen Hurts' season in 2021, Fran, as much as I think of, he had some accuracy issues from time to time, I also feel like he didn't have a whole lot of help on the other side of the receiving end. So I think adding a big target like a Drake London with a large catch radius, and at the end of the day, just strong, competitive receiving profile to maybe pluck that ball behind him, or that's thrown a little high, or the one where a cornerback is on his back. Somebody needs to help out the quarterback. And it's not a Jalen Hurts thing. That's an every quarterback thing. Everybody needs some help from time to time. It's hard to play quarterback. Not everything is going to be right on your face mask. You need a guy that's an absolute savant catching the football, and that's Drake London. I really think he would give Jalen Hurts and whoever would be the quarterback, not only for the Eagles, but other teams, a great Spider-Man-like catch radius to catch some balls that are slightly off because, whether it's, Matt Stafford or Jalen Hurts, it's hard out there to play quarterback. Not everything's right on the button. He needs some help.
I like it. Well, let's get to the next one here, 19 overall. And this was the name that really caught my eye. I was like, all right, we have not talked about this player a lot, especially in this part of the draft. Penn State safety, Jaquan Brisker. Here's the blurb here from Lance. Brisker's play has steadily progressed over the last 2 seasons. He's instinctive, he can run, and he is a terrific tackler on the back end. Like I said, I've not seen many mock drafts with Jaquan Brisker at all, much less to the Eagles at 19 overall. So I was like, all right, we really do have to talk about it. And just getting to Lance's point, I agree. I think I watched Jaquan Brisker last year, he was going to the Senior Bowl. He was set to enter the 2021 draft. I was like, more of a developmental player. I didn't think he saw the game particularly fast. There were things I wanted to see him improve on. Watching Penn State as often as I did this year, you saw that he was just playing faster. He was around the ball much more. I thought he was really impressive this year. I was sad to not see him in Mobile a week ago, but that's an interesting selection there in the top 20.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that. I really enjoyed Brisker's tape in 2021. He was a guy that lined up in the box a lot more than I expected. He saw number one lining up in linebacker roles quite often. He's definitely a dime presence out there. Reminds me a lot of Morgan Burnett coming out of Georgia Tech, played a lot of ball for the Packers.
Good one. I like that.
A 10, 12-year vet in this league out there. I think it's interesting just look at Lance's safety pecking order, which we don't particularly know. We just know his first round. You see Kyle Hamilton, but some other guys that have consistently found themselves in first-round mocks aren't there, like Dax Hill, Jalen Petrie, Lewis Sine out of Georgia. He's going with the Jaquan Brisker in the first round as his second overall safety. So I think the safety class is very interesting, very deep through the middle of the draft. Who's going to go after Kyle Hamilton? I think that's very up for a discussion. I think the combine is going to be a big determinant to see how these guys test. A lot of underclassmen here. So we want to see how Dax Hill runs. What does Lewis Sine run? Some juniors out here we want to work out. Nick Cross is a guy that's getting a lot of steam from NFL guys, 6'1", 215. But to bring it back to Jaquan Brisker, safety number 2 off the board for Lance Zierlein.
All right, so we've talked a lot about a lot of Senior Bowl players over the last couple of weeks, right? So for this mock draft exercise, I wanted to just kind of take a look. Is there a non-Senior Bowl player here in this mock draft where you love the team fit, and we'll say outside the top 15, so getting in the back end of round 1? For me, I loved the match of Kyler Gordon at 23 to the Arizona Cardinals. I don't know if Kyler Gordon is going to go in the first round. Super hyper athletic corner from Washington. He's got tons of traits. He's big, he's long, he's got some physicality to him and all the athleticism that you want. he's played all over the secondary, so you love the versatility. And to me, that's what kind of speaks to it. It's like we've seen Arizona kind of dip into this well in the past with that Washington Huskies program, and especially with versatile players on defense, especially in the back seven. So to me, this one it fits like a glove. I love the fit of Kyler Gordon to Arizona. If you tell me that happens in the second round, yes, makes perfect sense. You tell me it happens in the third round, makes perfect sense. You tell me it happens in the first round, it also makes perfect sense. So I do love that fit there for Lance in the back end of the first round.
So let's go all the way to the back end of the first round. The 31st overall pick, the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't know if that means Lance thinks they're going to lose the Super Bowl Sunday, but they're going to have Tyler Linderbaum fall to 31 overall and give Joe Burrow some interior offensive line help, which they're just begging for, pounding the table, smashing the table. Tyler Linderbaum in front of Joe Burrow for the next 10 years. That is exactly what this offense needs, this offensive line needs. I would run to the podium with a ski mask because that is highway robbery. I think Tyler Linderbaum to the Bengals is exactly what they would want, whether they're in the top 5, top 15, 20th, picking 31st, 32nd. I bet Tyler Linderbaum is on the top of their draft board saying, we need some guard, center, guard help, and that would be a great, great pick.
The amount of stretch zone that they run would be a perfect fit. I know Lance is a little bit worried about Linderbaum's size, but I think that's a good fit there.
And real quick, Fran, before we put these to bed, while we're talking sliders here, I see Linderbaum down to 31. That's one of the later I've seen. Guy we're talking week after week here, Karl Laftis. Yep. Now 30th overall. Is this where we at with Karl Laftis? Our good buddy Jordan Reed had him 28th the other day in his mock draft. Is this where things are trending? Is Karl Laftis going to be one of the major sliders of the first round?
That's a good question. Is there anybody else? I know you always kind of take an eye on like the pecking order, guys that fall out real quickly as we wrap this up. Anybody that fell out of the first round that shocked you?
Yeah, there was a few. I think, the Christian Harrises of the world. Andrew Booth was surprising to not see in the first round. Yeah. He's going to be a freak tester. Look out for him in Indianapolis. Devontae Wyatt, I thought, had a great Senior Bowl week, really showing that he's a 3-down player with the best pass rush juice of any interior guy, in my opinion. But I think Lance hit it on the head. No tight ends, no running backs in the first round.
Yep.
And I'm just not sure who's going to warrant that conversation. Does Breece Hall squeeze in there to 30th overall? Does a James Cook excite some teams? Maybe go late in the first round, possibly. But I think this is really the way things are trending. We already talked about the safety spot with, Petrie, Dax Hill, Lewis Sine still on the board there as well. So a couple interesting picks there remaining in the second round.
Well, you mentioned no tight ends in the first round. We are going to talk about that tight end class next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Ben, you, Dane, and I going to break down that whole class from start to finish, just the guys that have stood out at this point in the process next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Always good stuff there from Ben Fennell, as always. Let's wrap up the show with our draft mailbag, as we have a mock draft from D. Jansen22, who left a 5-star review on our Apple Podcast page with this mock draft, saying thank you for all the intel on this year's draft. Always look forward to the podcast. I did a simulator mock draft with some trades, so we're just going to buzz through, but there's a bunch of players here. We're going to buzz through fast. Jordan Davis at 16 overall, the defensive tackle from Georgia. Monstrous run stuff where what he's going to do against the run. The big question with Jordan Davis is just how impactful he could be against the pass, but a dominant early downs player against the run. 43 overall, Zion Johnson, the offensive lineman from Boston College, listed as a guard here. He showed that versatility last week in Mobile, one of the best linemen in the draft. So getting him at 43 overall, I think a lot of people would view as high value. And speaking of high value, a couple picks later at 54, cornerback Roger McCreary. Falling to the mid-second round would be a little bit surprising, really the latter stages of the second round, but with that body type, some people might hit the pause button there, but McCreary checks a lot of boxes at playing the cornerback position. Let's get to round 3 here. Pass rusher Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State. He did a really nice job this past year for the Nittany Lions, was really productive. His first year as a full-time starter at the college level, because he was a part-time starter with the Temple Owls going back to 2020 and beyond. So you look at Arnold Ebiketie, this is a guy who's a high-effort player. You love his motor. He can win off the ball with his first step. Had a solid week of practice down there in in Mobile, Alabama. Let's get to the next pick here. Jake Ferguson, the tight end from Wisconsin. Really an underrated player. And again, another player, you just check a lot of boxes. I think he profiles well as a low-end number one, maybe a really good number two tight end in the NFL just because of what he can do as a blocker and as a pass catcher. John Mechie II, wide receiver from Alabama, next off the board here, number 85. This is a guy that probably goes higher if not for the torn ACL he suffered in the SEC title game. So John Mechie, potentially good value there, latter stages of round 3. And on a couple picks later, Kobe Bryant, the cornerback from Cincinnati. He's a tall corner, is seen as having some position versatility, potential inside player, also a potential safety, but he's a tall corner, showed the ability to be really productive this year, opposite Sauce Gardner, who goes very high in this mock draft. But Kobe Bryant had a good week of practice down there in Mobile, Alabama. I love his size. I love his ball skills. I love his instincts. There's going to be questions about the athleticism, but a tall physical corner with good instincts and toughness, you can't lose going with that combination. Isaiah Thomas next up, the pass rusher from Oklahoma. He's got some inside-out versatility. He's long. He's tough. He's got a high motor. He's not going to wow you with his athletic traits, but you like a lot of what Isaiah Thomas brings to the table. Continuing day 3 here, Brock Purdy, the quarterback from Iowa State. Undersized. The arm talent is solid. It's not great, but what I love, he's just got a toughness to him. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Eagles backup quarterback Gardner Minshew, just because of the style of which he plays. He was at the Shrine Bowl last week. Brock Purdy, a 4-year starter, I believe, with Iowa State. Let's go to Leo Chenal, the linebacker from Wisconsin, a junior who declared for this draft. He's a big off-ball backer who's got some flexibility to be able to use as a pass rusher. His versatility will serve him well. Tyler Goodson, he's a big thumper downhill for Iowa, 220-plus pound back, was really good in 2020. The production wasn't always there in 2021, but that Iowa run scheme, you're always churning through runners, and Goodson looks like he's next in line there to enter the NFL. And then lastly, Jake Camarda, the punter from Georgia. Can't say I've studied Jake Camarda, but the Eagles addressing the punting situation there with the final pick in this mock draft. So Jansen also added in a bunch of picks that he acquired in these trades. So Detroit's first-round pick, I would assume that's the for 2023. Carolina's first-round pick, Atlanta's second-round pick, Carolina's third pick. So a bunch of picks there. Obviously, everybody loves the idea of trading for more picks in future years. So D. Jansen, thanks so much for the 5-star review. Thanks so much for the mock draft. And again, if you've got a mock draft that you want us to break down, if you've got a question about certain prospects, head on over to our Apple Podcast page, our Spotify page, our Stitcher page, wherever you listen. Leave us a rating, leave us a comment. We will break it down on an upcoming episode right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand. As I said earlier with Ben, Dane, and I are going to be back early next week breaking down this tight end position. You do not want to miss it. We're getting closer to the combine. So much to come right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.